Hi, everybody. It's Debbie here from Thrive. And for those of you that don't know us, we are a parent-led organization and we provide a range of support services to families who have children who are deaf. And today I'm here with Lynette Diederichs, who I have known for a long time. She has been an important part of my life. Lynette is an educator of the deaf. She is deaf herself. And when I think of Lynette, I just think of this wonderful passion that she has for literacy. And this is a huge topic for us parents who have children who are deaf or hard of hearing. I mean, for me, this has been really at the focal point of my child's education. And Lynette's life work is to find ways to make spoken language accessible to deaf learners so that they are able to gain and develop their literacy skills. And what an amazing purpose in life, Lynette. I think it's incredible. Your passion for literacy, it humbles me. And I think we're so happy to have you in this space. Lynette is the founder of...
Thank you very much for inviting me to be with you today.
It's wonderful to have you. Lynette is the founder of Cued Speech South Africa, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about cued language, cued speech, and Lynette is our resident South African expert in the space. She has traveled to the UK and to the US to gain training and to gain her certifications. And just such a warm welcome to you, Lynette. And if you could just great. Okay, if you could just start today with telling us a little bit more about yourself.
Okay. Well, you've already mentioned quite a bit about me, so I'll be able to keep that very short and brief. Yes, I am profoundly deaf, and I'm married to Richard, who's hearing, and I have 3 adult hearing children, Jonathan, Kirsten, and Joshua. And as you've said, I'm a qualified teacher. I've had something like 25 years of teaching experience, of which the last 16 years have been dedicated to teaching deaf children. In my free time, I enjoy crafting and gardening, but I really, really love reading. So yeah, I do have an absolute passion for helping the deaf to become literate, to be able to read both for pleasure and for information, to be able to find out things that they need to know. I'm really passionate about literacy.
Yeah, Lynette, why are you so passionate about literacy?
That's probably an easy one. Without my faith in God and my mother and the gift of literacy, I wouldn't be where I am today. One of the highlights of my day for me is to be able to sit down with a cup of tea and a very good book and being drawn into the plot of the story and the antics of the characters. And none of that depends on my hearing. Reading for me has made it possible for me to carry on developing my language, expanding and enriching my vocabulary, and just all my general knowledge, and to cope with the demands of schooling, with my study and things in work, and to just generally cope with all the printed media that's all the way around us. I actually find it very sad that there are so many deaf that don't read because they don't understand the language, and so it's really difficult for them to enjoy reading, so they don't, and they just miss out on so many benefits that come with being able to read. Then I'm just so grateful that in this hearing world that I'm able to communicate with people both verbally, which I'm very lucky to be able to do, but also to be able to read and write, to express myself via emails and WhatsApp, and to be able to just be independent in that, not having to ask somebody to help me all the time. And when I in a spoken conversation and I'm struggling to lip read somebody, to be able to say, you know what, can you just write that down for me? I didn't understand a word of what you were saying. So even though I can talk back, there are lots of deaf people in that situation where not only can't other hearing people understand them because they don't speak or they don't sign with them, they actually have to ask them to write down, and they've got to be able to write back. You know, I think being illiterate just impacts in so many different ways, and it just limits their studies, their career opportunities, and job opportunities. So I think it's understandable why my experiences and what I know what it's like to be deaf, why my dream is for all deaf people to be able to access learning that doesn't depend on hearing. And to my mind, that's actually one of the best gifts that you can give a deaf and hard of hearing child. And which is why I did all this research to try and find out how I can help, and how I discovered cute speech and how it supports language and literacy development.
So maybe jumping off from there, you can explain to everybody what is cute speech?
You know what, it's probably easier first to say what it's not than what it is. It's not a language. It's not a sign language, and it's not a communication board system. You know, when people get incoming information and they have to process it in a lot of different ways, and most of it is typically via speech. But when you're deaf, you have to depend on your other senses to try and make sense of what's happening around you, and it's typically vision. You know, when you are deaf, you depend a lot on vision. And for me personally, gathering information is via lip reading, spoken conversation is via lip reading. But if I'm struggling to understand something, then somebody has to write things down. So I depend heavily on reading, and which is one of the reasons why Dr. Cornett was so surprised. Why deaf people don't read more? Why don't we read more? Because it doesn't depend on hearing. So he really wondered why deaf people struggled so much to learn to read. So he really made it an effort to try and research this and to try and solve the problem. So, you know, he understood that the difficulties that deaf people have in listening and lip reading, and also the importance of being able to have access to the language very, very early in your life. So he designed something that is actually, he actually called it an auditory visual system, you know, so it's auditory, but it's visual, to show how the smallest sound in any spoken language becomes accessible to a deaf child, where you could actually say, like, look here, you know, it's like a combination of helping him to see, but with whatever residual hearing he had. And so he actually called the system cute speech, meaning not you cueing as you are talking, so that the deaf and hard of hearing child sees all those little sounds that he would not normally have access to, especially because lip reading is so difficult. And then it's what you are saying, you're cueing what you are saying. So he has a very natural way of being able to learn the language. You know, Debbie, it's like, you know, there are lots of different sign languages in the world, right? There's British Sign Language, there's American Sign Language. You get the same thing with cute languages. You get cute American English, you get cute British English, you get cute Spanish, you get all those things. And each one of those cute speech systems represent the phonology of that language, you know, the unique knowledge of that language. So we are talking about the system, but each one of those systems is particularly for a specific language. So if you think in terms of South African cute English, okay, now British cute English and South African cute English have a lot of similarity, but we are very distinctly South African. We have our own accent and we have our own way of saying things, and people here overseas, you know, you're from South Africa. Yeah. But so that's the cues, the system for South African English means that there are 12 cues for the 44 phonemes that we use in South African English. There are 8 handshakes for the 24 consonants, and then there are 4 placements around the mouth for the 20 vowels. Using the cues take away the guesswork that often comes when you are lip reading similar looking sounds on the lips. Okay, so you know, like consonants, those where you have consonants that look the same on the hand, they look the same on the lips, right? They are placed on different hand shapes to take away that confusion. So, for example, t and da look the same on the lips, so that's t and that's da. Or n and l look the same on the lips, so that's n and l. And the same thing happens with consonants. So you have a group of with vowels, and they look the same on the lips, like o, u, and o. So it's o, u, and o. So by placing them on different placement, the child can see those different sounds and not confused by the lip patterns that are the same. Okay, so now what happens is not only are the sounds now visually different, but one also cues syllabifically. Okay, so at the same time that you're saying something, not the way you spell it. Okay, so in typical conversation, normal conversational, you have consonant, vowel, consonant, the way we're speaking. So the hand shapes move from a consonant to a vowel and back to a consonant, you know, depending on what word is being said. So the deaf and hard of hearing child now see a whole word in the sum of its parts, very clearly, very visually. So I'm making the vocab very easy, not only to access, but to actually also be able to remember and to internalize, because there's no confusion about what he's receiving. And then what's very nice about it, because the acute speech system is a closed system, you know, it's only 12 cues. So once you've learned that, you can basically cue anything you like. Maybe a bit slow to start off with, no, but just like when you learned how to use your cell phone, practice might bring the fluency, particularly if you use it, you know, then the fluency happens. So it's not like some people think, oh, it sounds so complicated, you know, when it's actually a very, very simple system.
Could you give us an example of a sentence in cued English?
So we can do that. I was actually going to bring that up a bit later, so just remind me not to show that. So not to show that. So like, okay, so say like, for example, if you want to look at the hand shape like D, for example, okay, the sound D is on the side like this, and the vowel O is cued on the mouth, and you want to say a word like door, all right? So now normally when we talk, we don't talk, how do you say it, like in a synthesized form, doing da, or we don't say da, or, all right? There's a fluency of when we are speaking. So that actually happens when you are cueing as well. So when you want to say the word door, the sounds get blended together. So although you synthesize it and you say da, or, which is fantastic for spelling, but when you say it normally, we just go door. And then when you are using it in a sentence, like you say, please shut the door. So visually, the child is able to see by the handshake exactly what you are saying in any given time.
Wonderful. That's great. It's fascinating, very fascinating. Could you just expand a little bit, Lynette? So if we take a cued speech or a cued language like cued English, why is this relevant and so beneficial in terms of language development?
Oh, okay. Well, I think most people that are involved in deaf education know how critical it is for a deaf child to have any language for both language and cognitive development. So the earlier and the better. And in the case of acquiring English, it's really all about access. So although there are many deaf and hard of hearing children who do learn to speak and do actually hear well enough to cope in a in a mainstream setting or in an oral environment, with the right support especially, we do know that there are many children who don't benefit optimally from the hearing aids or the cochlear implant. Then Cute English gives that very, very clear visual support for every word, every phrase, every sentence, without having to waste time with repetition. Sorry, what did you say? Say it again and again and again. Especially with all those little function words and word endings that deaf children so very, very often miss. So they can just pick up a lot of language by just watching you cue. And, like hearing children pick up a lot of language just by listening incidentally. We know deaf children can't do that. So if a cued language is used by other adults or by the family cueing while they're having conversation, the deaf child can also, like eavesdrop, he's watching the cued conversation and can have access to that same kind of conversation that's just around him all the time. It's particularly great when you're reading stories, you can cue everything word for word. You don't have to, first of all, think of a simpler or easier word for it, to substitute a word that you're reading. You can explain the word that's being used to be able to help the child to understand what the story is about, so that you really enrich and expand language very, very quickly. Especially if you then, there's a word that you're exposing the child to while you're reading, and then once you understand that word, you're using another word that has similar meaning. So straight away, you're expanding and enriching language all the time. There's no limits to vocabulary enrichment. You can say anything, anytime you're wanting. Then also in terms of listening skills, there are some professionals that think, and they're worried. They say, if you use a cued language, the child may not optimally use the hearing aids or optimally use their cochlear implant and become lazy listeners. But what I actually have found is that the cues give the brain an opportunity to process the incoming auditory input and actually primes the brain or the ear for whatever it is that you're hearing the head, what to hear for. So it actually really helps with being able to almost see what's being said before they actually see or hear what's being said. And Dr. Berlin, I don't know if you know about him, he was one of the pioneers in cochlear implant. And he was actually saying that children that have exposure to a cued language prior to cochlear implantation are actually very, very good candidates, okay? Because prior to the cochlear implantation, they sort of already know, or would know if they've been able to hear a little bit, they sort of know this cue is that sound. And then when they get switched on and they suddenly have all this new information coming in, those cues sort of help to say, you know what, this is a new sh or the new or the new da, and they help with the transition of becoming used to that, the new sound that they're hearing so much more quickly. And then, you know what, something that's really very interesting in terms of people that are really struggling to say, you're hearing and you're talking about sound and we're talking about deaf children.
Yeah.
How can we actually how does this make sense at all? So there is research that has taken place, and I actually really find this very interesting, is that they have found that the same area of the brain, which has up to now has always been that place where they've thought in the auditory cortex, where sound has been processed. So when they actually did research on this, and what they found out is that that same area in the brain is used to process sign language, which is soundless, the oral, the speech, which is obviously sound-based, and cueing. So they said the same area, which they always thought was for sound only. So that's actually led to the finding that the brain isn't looking for sound in particular, Debbie. It's actually looking for patterns that are embedded in the language. So whether these patterns are on the hands, on the lips, or on the tongue, it doesn't matter. So it's not about what you hear, it's the pattern. So if a child has very clear access to the patterns in the language, whatever the language says, then they're able to internalize it very, very easily. And so in terms of a cued language, the child doesn't have to be able to hear anything you are saying, because the brain will perceive the pattern of what they see on the lips and in the hand as a pattern in its own right, and makes it the language. You know what I'm saying? Okay, and then I really think one of the really best things for parents, they can cue anything, anytime, anywhere, in any way they want to. They just focus on the joy of being able to communicate with the child in the language that they already know.
Yeah.
So it might go a long way in sort of like easing any concerns that they have. Am I meeting the language needs of my child? Can I help my child? My child is deaf and all this sort of thing. They say, well, this cueing can take away that worry. And they're giving the child everything that they can possibly give the child. So, to summarize, in terms of language and language development and cueing, it's a chance for the deaf child to visually experience the language of sound, whether they hear it or not, and to learn it the same way as a hearing child does, providing that you cue consistently, using natural, age-appropriate, and meaningful conversation.
Yeah, wonderful, Lynette. Thank you. You explained that really beautifully and very clearly. And what about lip reading? So you said earlier, and of course you would know, I mean, you are lip reading this conversation right now. Lip reading is all the time, exactly. And lip reading is really difficult. But how does cued speech support lip reading for language development?
It's a biggie, baby, because I can tell you that from experience personally, lip reading is not easy. And, because really, number one, you actually, to be able to lip read well, you already have to be able to think in the language, to make sense of what's being said, like I can go, okay, Debbie, I got that. I didn't get that word. I got that. So in context of the sentence that's being said, you sort of like try and figure out what that missing word is. Yeah. But that means it's a little bit of a catch-22, because to fill in that missing word, you've got to have the language. And so you've got to have the language. But if you've got a lip read to have the language, then how do you have the language if you can't lip read? So it's a little bit of a catch-22 situation. It really, really is very difficult to lip read a language that you don't know. And then, of course, to make it a little bit more complicated, there are so many sounds that actually that are sound different to the hearing ear, but look the same on the lips for a deaf person. I think I read somewhere not so long ago that there are something like 70% of sounds in the English language that look the same on the lips. Yeah. And I can agree with that, absolutely, and I can really believe that. So, for example, what really brought home to my mother that my hearing aid wasn't, there was a time period that I had a hearing aid for a short while, and my mother sort of like realized, maybe this hearing aid isn't such a quick fix solution after all. Is that myself personally, I thought home industry was home in the street, because that's what it looks like.
It looks the same.
So, yes. I mean, this goes to show, there's a huge difference between knowing the vocab home industry and saying home in the street. They don't have the same meaning, and that just misvocabulary, miscomprehension, misunderstanding. So my mother was like, okay, how much am I really understanding all the time? Yeah. So of course, it makes it a very unreliable way of learning a language. And it's why sign language was developed in the first place. It's not so stressful, and it's very easy to access sign language. So cued speech is actually a lip reading tool. That's what it was really designed for, to be a lip reading tool. So what happens is that each hand shape or position has a group of sounds that look very different to the lips. Okay, so like for example, this hand shape has as in leg, and sh as in shark, and woo as in water. So sh, woo. So the lip patterns are very clearly different. Okay, so
Oh,
those
yes,
three are
yes,
essential.
yes.
So the child has to look which of those three sounds I'm using. I mean, if I go,
Yes.
I don't know which of the three am I using. So it makes sense. They have to look at the lips to make sense of what I'm reading. So if they can't hear what I'm saying, what sounds I'm using, those lip patterns help them to access what they wouldn't be able to get otherwise. So then by looking at those lip patterns, you know, like when you're talking and they see all these little sounds dancing in front of them, you know, like strings of letters being put together for the word, they don't realize that, but they're actually practicing their lip reading in a very, very natural way. So I was going to show you then about the da, or, and the door now, so you understand about the da and the door, so that they can see that I'm not saying the other hand shapes, you know, the other sounds. I'm saying da for door, or the other ones that come in there, like that's he and or and ah. They see I'm saying or, so they can differentiate which of the sounds that I'm using. So it's actually amazing when you think how quickly that information is being processed in the brain. Well, I'm talking about patterns and how the brain can make sense of all this with a minimal amount of stress required. You know, and I'm actually thinking in terms of other words like toe, do, no, low. Actually look exactly the same on the lip.
It looks the same.
Toe, do, no, low. Or what about a phrase like it is, isn't it? And when you look at my lip patterns, they haven't moved. But the minute you're cueing it, it's saying it is, isn't it? So the child sees exactly all those sounds that he would otherwise miss. And then you know what, for me, a really, really biggie is when people introduce themselves and they say, hello, I live in. So names or places of names are really, really difficult to lip read because you can't put them in context of a sentence. So
yes,
very, very to my time, but at least now that I'm old, I don't have that same sort of embarrassment that goes when you're young. I can say, you know what, I didn't get your name. Will you please write it down?
yes,
But
yes,
so if you queuing just helps take away that confusion straight away. I go so far as to say that as far as lip reading goes, all deaf children, irrespective of the hearing loss, can benefit from it because it helps to lower the stress that comes with constant, you know, having to lip read.
absolutely.
You know, it just takes away that stress away. We can almost say, you know, like a volume. You know, when you're listening to a radio and you have that static and you're fine tuning it, same like that. It just takes away that stress of having to listen and you just get information that you need. You know, to have to concentrate like that all day, it's really, really
I can imagine the fatigue that would set in.
It definitely is. So just to sum up, so what happens when a child has to lip read during exposure to acute language? It does help to improve lip reading skills in a very natural way, to help them to cope with lip reading people in a normal conversation setup when they don't sign or like, you know, they are very difficult to understand. It's by auditory information, so lip reading them really helps them.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Lynette. And what about speech development? How could cued speech impact that?
The word cued speech.
Yeah,
I need to focus on that a little bit because that terminology of cued speech has actually caused a lot of misunderstanding, both in deaf education and within deaf culture, generally speaking. So I just want to mention or talk a little bit about that. Many deaf people don't like to use their voice because either they can't hear their own speech or they're unsure of production. And maybe when they've tried, they've been laughed and mocked at, you know, so it's very sensitive matter with a lot of them. So when they see or hear cued speech, it's like, oh, we don't want to have anything to do with it. And they just, you know, kind of want to put it to the side. So just having explained a little bit earlier, and it just needs a little bit of re-emphasis here, the use of cued speech. And the whole thing is for the deaf and hearing, hard of hearing child to have a receptive, accurate way to receive what you are saying. Okay, it's not to force a child to speak back. And it's not meant to replace sign language either. It's just to give access to what you are saying in English. So, I mean, if the child then chooses to speak back, well and good. If he can't, you know, there are other ways of a child being able to express. But the thing is for your speech to be cued for my benefit, to be able to understand what you're saying. Okay? So the use of that terminology was probably not a very good one. But having said that, you know, a deaf child to be able to speak depends on lots and lots of different factors. But it's understandable that, say, like 90% of hearing parents that have deaf children would love their child to be able to speak their home language. But the cues themselves don't show how to say the sound. So if speech is desired, the child will still need to have speech therapy. But when used in speech therapy, those sounds are cued, right? And they make those target sounds clearly visible and reduces that constant repetition that's often used in speech therapy, and why a lot of deaf people do not like speech therapy. They say, watch my lips say this. I say P, and I'm saying ba. No, look and repeat P. So just by saying ba or P, it just takes away that constant need of repetition that's often found in speech therapy. And then, of course, when the speech sound is taught with the cue at the same time, they can follow the motoric reminder of the cues. And if they say the cues, you know, they say the sound of the cues in the right order, it actually becomes a perfect pronunciation tool. So they know exactly how to say it because the cues remind them how to say it when. You know, I think there are some deaf children we know will never really be able to use speech clearly. But if they learn to use cueing expressively, you know, whether they use voice or not, it's not important. With their lip patterns and the cues, they can be understood to be talking in English. Okay, we need to make a clear distinction here. This is not about sign language, because we know sign language has its own grammatical structure to be able to express in English, whether they're using voice or not. In my experience, however, what I have found is that once a deaf child is confident to say a sound because he knows now when to say it and how, spontaneous speech often develops all on its own. So
great. Yeah. And Lynette, what about reading and writing? How can a cued language support reading and writing?
Powerfully. The impact is huge, you know. There are actually 5 very critical skills that all children have to master, you know, whether they're deaf or hearing, whatever. And those 5 critical skills are really, really important to master to become truly literate. And they are phonological awareness, phonics, they are fluency, the vocabulary, and comprehension, those 5. So the use of cued language, all those are critical because those 5 all overlap. You can't really separate them. And ironically, the very first 2 depend on hearing. All right. So when they are watching the cues, they get to see that how we say things actually links to how we read and write things. And then they get to see those predictable relationship between the sound and the cues and the letters. So the impact on reading and spelling skills is huge. So especially when it's used with an Orton-Gillingham program like Thrash, all right? So now an Orton-Gillingham program teaches sound and spelling choices. So it's like a big visual map that has all these sounds with these spelling choices. And then when a child synthesizes from one sound to one spelling choice to another, it just gives this very clear visual mental map, you know, both cued as they're cueing it, as they're seeing it. And it just helps to give that mental pattern they need to be able to remember how to spell and write a word well. So also another thing that we find is that because of that exposure they have to the sounds, and they start seeing, we actually say how we want to write something. No, we don't say like green as G-R-E-N. We don't say G-R-E-N, we say green. And then when they understand that, they start writing phonetically as well. Yeah. And they start writing a word like said, right? S-E-D for said. Then you know they have cracked that alphabetic code, which is the one of the biggest things that can happen to help them to understand with their literacy on all in all. Which actually has very big implications on if they don't say the word or mouth the word right, then they will probably write it wrong as well. So there's big implications from that. I think the cues just give the brain a multi-sensory way of being able to process all the information that's coming in that helps make learning and remembering so much easier. I find it fascinating to watch, when I give spelling tests or the kids are having to write something I've said, to watch them quietly cueing to themselves, which actually helps them to remember to write the order of the letters down, which is a problem that a lot of deaf people have. They might know what letters to use, but not necessarily the order. And you find this a lot with adult deaf, when they finger spelling something, they'll say like, to say, things like that, because they're not sure of the order of the letters and they don't have this phonological pattern to help them to remember the order of the letters that have to be spelled. And then, when I first began teaching, I had to do what every teacher of the deaf does, is they have to write everything down on the blackboard. And so I found you write down the word, and then above it, you make a little notation that shows whether it's a short letter or a long letter, or it's one of the digraphs. And it's definitely not a natural and easy way to learn a language. I found it very frustrating. And then obviously when I started cueing, wow, it was liberating. It just released me from the blackboard. It just released me to be able to say what I wanted, when I wanted, how I wanted to. It was tremendous. Vocabulary development just accelerated. I've got lots of stories I can relate, but I think we are a bit limited for time. So, but obviously by watching the cues, they help to internalize the correct grammatical structure of the language. They can start from very simplex to more complex, just like a hearing child does, providing, and this is important, providing that they are giving that opportunity to make the mistakes that a hearing child does, when they are learning language. And that's normally corrected naturally by moms with their hearing children. A child may say, "Daddy, go," and mom says, "Oh, Daddy's gone," instead of using or making kids learn the correct grammatical structure and insisting they use it, which can only be learned through drilling, which makes it a very unnatural way of learning the language. In other words, they'll only know what you've taught them. They're not actually experiencing the growth of the language for themselves. So it's very, very important that you let them make those mistakes and let them learn through conversation. You have to have face-to-face conversation to be able to internalize the language. All right, and then through in reading particularly, Didi, I found that the increased phoneme awareness had a tremendous impact on being able to do word attack. You have words in front of you, and if you don't know how to say them, you don't know how to read them, you have a problem with internalizing them. But they would cue these words out the same way as a hearing child will sound them out. Yeah. And then if they didn't know how to sound out these words, they would get immediate visual feedback how to say that or cue out that word. It's very difficult to know how to cue out a word that you haven't seen cued or heard before. It's an unfamiliar word because, the problem with English is the complex, what they call orthography. The letter sound ways of people being able to write. The fact that there are so many ways that you can write the sound. Like just take the letter A, for example. In the A in ant, then you have the A in baby, you have the R in banana, you have the R in swan, you have the O in ball, and then you have the schwa in zebra. I mean, that's just 6 different ways the letter A is already got 6 different sounds. Never mind all the other ways that the letter A can be used, like in beach, E-E-I, or A-W, you know, I mean, it's a world where the deaf child has to navigate what's all these different, how they relate to it. So I can't tell you how many times I've had a deaf child say to me, this English is stupid, you know, especially when you read a word that is spelled the same, but it's said differently, like bow and bow, or a word that is spelled differently, but it's said the same, like hair and hair of a rabbit. You know, so English can be a literal minefield for deaf children to navigate. Then, of course, with those regular individual reading sessions, what we found with the children is that their fluency improved as their word attack skills improved, and they were able to master sounding out unfamiliar words. So they were able to start reading more easily, more fluently, more rapidly, with greater ease. And then the comprehension, you know, obviously the comprehension depends a lot on the language that they have and their background language that they already have. So being able to communicate and to be able to talk and discuss things with them just enriches that background knowledge that they need to be able to read with understanding. I mean, teaching this phonetically, they can read, just like I can read Zulu. I can read it phonetically, but then ask me, what did you read? And I was like, Angasi, because I don't have the language in me. So the cueing impact on reading is huge, because if they have the language in them, then they can read with understanding. But of course, because we know that deaf children have a problem with being able to access information around them all the time, you've actually got to make a point of making sure that you're giving them all that sort of background knowledge that they need to be able to apply to reading. So it's important that you enrich the conversations that you have with them, you know, in many varied ways possible. Expose them to different types of reading, both fiction and non-fiction, and to just help them to get as much knowledge that they can have to be able to read with them. Anyway, so to sum up, Debbie, is that the impact on spelling, lip reading, and reading skills is immediate. You can see that impact immediately. But in terms of language and comprehension, it really depends on how much time and effort you make in communicating with the child in face-to-face situations, both in school environment and home. And, you know, consistently and in meaningful conversations. But some children may only need, or may need a 24/7, you know, they may need cueing all the time to access everything, whereas some deaf children may only need it now and again, you know, oh, I didn't get that word, or I didn't really understand what you were saying here, especially if they're exposed to new vocabulary. So in terms of literacy development, it's gold dust. It's magic. It just gives them what they would otherwise miss.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lynette. And how do you see cued speech sitting within deaf education?
Very, 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 very relevant. Very, very, very important. You know, I don't have much experience in teaching the deaf in a hearing environment. But irrespective of where a child goes to school, even if cueing is only used in home, has a significant impact with helping the child to cope in the school environment, because home is like a natural language laboratory. You know, there's so much that's said at home that helps a child to build that patterning in the language, you know, because things are said over and over again in many different ways. So even if it's just used at home, it's fantastic. But obviously, ideally used in home and school would be better. But excuse me, there are very, very many different ways that will affect how a child will be able to cope in a mainstream setting. So like me, for example, despite being deaf at the age of 9, I was able to cope in a mainstream setting because of my language and my literacy skill. I was fortunate that I was able to attend a school that had a progressive principal and very supportive teachers. But I would say the best thing was that I had a friend who literally sat next to me from grade 2 right through to matric. And she was probably a better teacher for me than my teachers were, because she would instinctively keep on saying things like, Nettie, it sounds like, instinctively knowing how important it was for me to have access to the phonology of both English and Afrikaans. So knowing what I know now, and shame, even my mom was saying that, I think I would have benefited a lot more if I had had access to all my schooling, either through Cute English and Cute Afrikaans, because it would have eased that stress of having to concentrate all day for all day. And I probably wouldn't have all these concentration lines, that I have now. So it's very multisensory nature. Look, listen, and the movement. It's beneficial to all children, all learning styles. So if it's used in a mainstream class, all children will benefit. But the best thing is the deaf child gets everything that the hearing child does. And that, I repeat, is gold dust too. Be able to access everything is something that every deaf person wants. And some schools in America, or with some families where the children are deaf, their parents, if the teacher themselves doesn't cue in a class, in the mainstream class, the parents pay for a cue speech transliterator to sit there and cue everything for the child. Even the environmental noises, so the child is fully aware of everything that's going on in the class. But so that's in the mainstream setup. In schools for the deaf, where I've been teaching for the last 16 years, I could see that the access to sign language provided rapid rapid communication, developmental skills. They could communicate easily with each other, but they still struggle to acquire grade appropriate literacy skills. So they learn all about the sounds and the letters and everything, and then when they get exposed to a second traditionally sound-based language, they take this knowledge of the sounds that they've already learned and they transfer it to learning a second sound-based language. So I think the biggest problem here in the school where there's sign language and English is that a soundless spatial language like sign language doesn't give that bridge to a sound-based language, right? So even though they expect to do it through writing. So I really, really think that what deaf and hard of hearing children desperately need in the setup is to have a better access to the spoken English, preferably from the young age, so that they have access to the same phonology, vocabulary, grammatical structure, and understanding of the language that the deaf or the hearing child has before learning to read and write it. Okay, then I will actually go so far as to say that it's imperative that sign language is actually separated from English.
Yeah.
To allow both those languages to be developed to higher standard, to maximal level, to be able to achieve true bilingualism. In a recent 3-year bilingual pilot project I was teaching, and we found that team teaching to be very, very effective. So what happens is that everything was cued in English and supported with sign language and in all the subjects, but sign language as a language and English as a language were taught separately, using the languages to teach the languages. So not mixing the two languages, unless you obviously had to desperately use it to try and explain something. Yeah. But that meant that the development in both those languages were optimal. They were being tracked. But in all the other subjects, you know, the integration between the two, so the kids were being exposed to both at the same time, which making that vocabulary development in both languages all the time. But in my opinion, in that kind of setup, you have to use people that can model each one of those fluently. I think that's one of the problems in deaf education today, is that unfortunately there are many teachers that are not fluent in sign language. So that is an issue that has to be dealt with. But in a setup like this, you have a teacher that can really speak, can cue, and you have somebody that can really sign, can sign. You're making the best of both worlds, and the child has access to both equally. You know, this also releases the stress from parents, you know, having to feel, we have to learn sign language fluently to be able to meet the needs, the language needs of my child. Means I can say, no, my child can learn sign language with somebody that is already fluent in signing. I don't have to worry about that. I can just focus on giving the child the language of my home and to be able to help my child to be included in my family optimally. So that means that actually gives the child an opportunity to be able to move freely between the deaf world and the hearing world, which is often what happens with children that are born to hearing families and to hearing families. They never seem to quite fit in either the deaf or the hearing world. They're sort of like having to be able to be flexible in between the two. So what actually happens is that in America, many of the cute kids have actually been known to say they love the cueing in an academic setting because it gives them the same access that the hearing child has, but they enjoy using signing in a social setting, you know, because of the social and social environment. So you can see the benefits of both of that. And then children that have been brought up with cute English have repeatedly been shown to really excel in their schooling because of the good access they have to the language. And they can, and they do go on to study in fields like medicine, law, science, all those areas that most people think deaf people can't, you know, can't achieve or are unattainable. So, yeah, you know, there's just so many positive benefits of using the cute language, both in a hearing environment or in the deaf environment.
Yeah. Lynette, thank you so much. I think you've absolutely demonstrated the immensity of your knowledge and the immensity of your passion. And that's amazing. Just a last question from me, and that is, if a family or anybody listening to this would like some more information, or how do they access this huge speech system?
So how do they go about wanting to learn to cue?
Yes.
That's what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm just checking to make sure I understood your question, Debbie. Well, there are a few options. One of them, you can actually teach yourself to cue. It's not a very complicated system to learn. So once you understand the principles of how it works, you can teach yourself. I taught myself. So it's not like rocket science. I mean, it's not something that's so difficult that you can't. The whole system was designed in a way to make it easy for both parents and for deaf children to learn. But it is advisable to have a little bit of face-to-face contact with somebody that does know, so no bad habits develop, and that there's any questions that you don't know, that you can have those answered. And that can be done, you know, via WhatsApp or face-to-face call or on a Zoom session. I'm still currently designing an online course, so I haven't actually finished with that. But for parents that want to go now and want to learn now because they're inspired about what I've said, they can go online to the Cute Speech UK portal, because they offer a cute speech course there that they can do in their own time. But I have found from experience that if it's not done in a short span of time, an intense span of time.
Yeah.
It's very easy to lose interest and motivation. So for me personally, I think I would recommend a face-to-face course with 1 or 2 people, you know, this whole COVID thing at the moment, because it's very, very based on being able to do things face-to-face, that's number one, but with activities, which I have actually found is one of the best ways to encourage retention of the cues and memorizing the cues, and to actually, you know, they say when you do something, you remember it. So if you do it in a 2-day intense course here, where Cute Speech headquarters are, and then when you finish it, by the time you finish the course, you not only will you know the principle of cueing, and you'll be able to cue anything you like. You will have quite a lot of background knowledge to cue speech, application, and all different setups. You know, like some of it I've already been able to share with you. And the course includes face-to-face tutoring, all teas and lunches, it's a manual and certification. And this is particularly relevant for professionals who want to get CBD points, because it is accredited with 14 CBD points. Parents of deaf children pay half price, deaf do it for nothing, and then obviously professionals, sorry, have to pay the full price. Yeah.
And Lynette, just for anyone who's watching, I know Lynette is based in KZN in Camperdown, but am I right, Lynette, in saying that on your premises you actually do have accommodation options?
Oh, yes, sorry, I failed to mention that. Yes, especially for people that have to travel from far. Lalanda, which is the headquarters, what it's called, has a bedroom with 2 beds, 2 single beds, and a bed that can be used in the one other area. So I have sleeping for 3 people. There's a little kitchenette area if they want to have little snacks and that. But if they choose an accommodation option, then we also provide the meals for that.
Okay. Lovely. And Lynette, what I'll do is, for those interested, I will put a slide at the end of this with your contact details, so that people know how to get in touch with you if they want more information, you know, etc. But Lynette, thank you so much. It's been a conversation that, you know, I've wanted to have with you for a long time, and thank you for your sharing your knowledge and your passion, and for making it so clear to I think anyone can listen to this and have a really good understanding of the benefits of acute language. And yeah, thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Debbie. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share something that's really close to my heart. I just hope that people have a better understanding of what it is now.
Absolutely, they will after this. Yeah. Thank you, Lynette. I'll see you soon.
Stay well. Bye.
You too.